Okay, digestive system. So we'll start out by color coding. We will do carbs and sugars in blue. We will do lipids in green. And we will do proteins in red. Okay, so we'll go ahead and draw our digestive tract. We start out in the mouth. It then continues down into the esophagus, into the stomach. The stomach continues with our small intestine. The small intestine then opens up into our large intestine. And the large intestine sort of squiggles and comes together in the rectum. And then the anal canal at the bottom. We also have some accessory glands nearby. We have our liver, which is going to sit right next to the stomach, with the gallbladder on the ventral side of it. We have the pancreas that actually sits behind the stomach, but I'm going to kind of exaggerate it out a little bit so we can see where it sits. And then up in the mouth we have these sort of salivary glands underneath and on the side. Alright, so let's go ahead and label each of these areas. We have the mouth. We have salivary glands. We have the esophagus. We have the stomach. And between these we have the lower esophageal sphincter, or cardiac sphincter. We have then the pyloric sphincter, where the stomach meets the first part of our small intestine, which is called the duodenum. The second part is then called the jejunum. And then the third part is called the ileum with an E. The ileum opens up into the cecum, off of which is our little teeny tiny appendix. And we have another sphincter here called the ileocecal valve. We'll say IC valve for short. We then have the ascending colon. We have the transverse colon. Which continues over here. We have the descending colon. We have the squiggle, which is called sigmoid. And then the storage facility, which is the rectum. And outside of that, the bottom of that, sorry, is the anus. So here is our digestive tract. So we're going to look at each region throughout the digestive tract. We'll look at the mainly the mucosa, but all of the layers that make up the structures of our gut tube. And then we'll also look at the different digestive processes that occur in each of these places. Alright, so liver, down this little guy is our gallbladder, GB, and here's our pancreas. Okay, so let's start way up at the top with the mouth. So the mouth is the first step in digestion. The mucosa in the mouth is going to be a stratified squamous epithelium, because we know that we're going to have a stratified squamous epithelium in places where we have any kind of friction and eating and chewing is going to very much create friction in the mouth, and so we need a type of epithelium that kind of can withstand that type of friction. So we also have our accessory glands up there, which are our salivary glands. And the salivary glands are going to make saliva, which is going to keep our mouth clean. It's going to keep it free of cavities. We've got lysozymes and defensins against bacteria. But our saliva also is going to have important digestive enzymes, because this is where digestion actually begins. So the digestive processes that occur in the mouth first is ingestion, where you're actually just taking food into the mouth. The second is propulsion, where we are moving things through our digestive tract. And the type of propulsion you have mainly in the mouth is something called deglutition. And deglutition is just a fancy word for swallowing. So we know that our tongue is really going to help us accomplish that. We also are going to have some mechanical digestion in the form of chewing. And this is, of course, accomplished by our teeth. And then lastly, we have chemical digestion or enzymatic digestion. And this is going to be accomplished by enzymes found in our salivary glands, or made in our salivary glands and found in saliva. So the first one is going to be called a salivary amylase. Whoops, that should be in blue. Salivary amylase, because an amylase is going to digest carbs. Specifically, we're going to start by digesting starch in the mouth. The second enzyme that we are going to find in our saliva is called a lingual lipase, and this one should be green. So lingual lipase, as the name suggests, lip means lipids, ase means enzyme that sort of helps with those breakdowns. So this is going to start to digest larger fats. So the salivary glands are going to produce these two enzymes, salivary amylase and lingual lipase, and that's where we begin digestion in the mouth. All right, onward. Our next area of digestion is the esophagus. So we ingest food in the mouth, we chew it up, our tongue compacts it into a nice kind of ball, which we call a bolus, and this bolus will now travel down the esophagus. So the mucosa of the esophagus is also a stratified squamous, and there's nothing really noteworthy about the submucosa or the muscularis. It's got a thick muscularis, but that's about all we care about in the esophagus. We've got a stratified squamous. The only type of digestive process that occurs in the esophagus is propulsion, just movement. There's no absorption or digestion or anything, just propulsion. And the type of rhythmic contraction that occurs in the esophagus is called peristalsis. Peristalsis. All right, so now we have made it to the stomach. So I'm going to move over here so we've got plenty of room, because there's a lot that goes on in our stomach. So the stomach is an important organ of digestion, and this is where we're going to start really secreting things. Not a lot of absorption, but because it's less about friction, now we're going to have some secretion by glands. Our mucosa is now going to be made up of a simple columnar epithelium. And that simple columnar epithelium is going to be arranged in a specific way so that it's going to be organized into what are called gastric pits and gastric glands. Gastric pits and gastric glands. Now, all of the gastric pits and the gastric glands are made up of simple columnar epithelium, but we have specific cells of that simple columnar epithelium that we find in our stomach. And so within the gastric pits, we really only have one cell type. They have two names, but we've got what are called surface mucus and mucus neck. Surface and neck. These are both mucus cells. And so, of course, from the name, we can tell that they are going to produce mucus. Lots of it. Lots and lots of mucus, because we want to prevent something called autodigestion in the stomach, which is where the contents of the stomach actually eat away at the walls of the stomach itself. So this very thick layer of mucus made by surface mucus and mucus neck cells is going to prevent that. So our gastric glands are going to have three important cell types that we care about. So the first one are called parietal cells. So parietal cells are going to make hydrochloric acid, which is very important in keeping bacteria at bay, keeping us healthy, but also in denaturing proteins, which is just kind of preparation for chemical digestion of proteins. So it's not actual chemical digestion or enzymatic digestion, it's just kind of getting ready for it. It's a prep phase. So we're also going to make something called intrinsic factor here. And intrinsic factor is really important in absorption of B12. So we think about B12 as being this sort of energy vitamin. Gives us a lot of energy. Whenever people get B12 shots, they have this burst of energy, but B12 is also really important in our red blood cells, and it helps with the formation and hemoglobin, oxygen carrying capacity of hemoglobin. So actually, if you don't have intrinsic factor and thus you can't absorb B12, it's actually not compatible with life. You would die. So we absolutely need it. All right, so we then also have cells called chief cells. And the chief cells are going to make two important enzymes that we care about. So the first one, I'm going to draw it in red, is called pepsinogen. And so pepsinogen is actually the inactive form of an enzyme that will digest proteins. And we'll talk about that in a minute. All right, and then we're also going to secrete something called gastric lipase. And gastric lipase is responsible for digesting lipids. Lipase, lipids. The last cells that we're going to see in our stomach are called enteroendocrine. And from the name endocrine, we can infer that it's going to secrete a hormone, which is true. It's going to secrete a hormone called gastrin. And gastrin is going to encourage secretion of all of these other things. So gastrin is going to be released when contents are in the stomach. When that bolus has arrived to the stomach, gastrin will be released, and it's going to encourage the release of pepsinogen, of gastric lipase, of hydrochloric acid, and of intrinsic factor. So gastrin will just encourage our normal secretions in the stomach. And then there's nothing really noteworthy about the submucosa, but what we do care about in the stomach is that our muscularis has 3 layers, and that's going to allow us to accomplish the churning action in the stomach, which is a type of mechanical digestion. So in our stomach, we have our gastric pits and our gastric glands, and they're going to kind of look like this. They sort of don't look really different from one another. But the glands are usually lower down and the pits are higher up. So we're kind of halfway through here. So up above the dotted line are the gastric pits. Below my dotted line are the glands. And these are each of the cells that you'll find. So in our pits, you'll find just surface mucus and mucus neck cells up here to create that protective mucus barrier. In the glands, the lower part, you'll find parietal, chief, and enteroendocrine cells. And so the processes that are accomplished in the stomach, really not a lot of them. So the first one is propulsion. And propulsion is kind of combined with mechanical digestion in the stomach. And that is accomplished via the churning. of the stomach, the way your stomach kind of churns things up, sort of like how a dryer dries clothes. Your stomach is going to continually sort of contract those muscularis layers and move things around, and so that movement actually accomplishes the mechanical digestion of this bolus. And so we're churning this all up. At the same time, we are allowing for some chemical digestion or enzymatic chemical digestion. And so we already talked about these. The first one, remember, was a gastric lipase. And gastric lipase will digest fats. And remember, when I say digest, chemically or enzymatically, that means we're actually physically breaking bonds. And then we're also going to secrete pepsinogen. But as I said, pepsinogen is the inactive form. So pepsinogen needs to be activated to pepsin. And pepsin is what is then going to actually digest proteins. And so pepsinogen will be activated into pepsin by hydrochloric acid in the lumen of our stomach. So hydrochloric acid will actually activate pepsinogen to pepsin in the lumen of the stomach. And now remember, this is really important, that all of our protein digesting enzymes are secreted in their pro or their inactive form, because that's going to disallow this protein digesting enzyme from digesting the organ that made it, which is conveniently made of protein. So if we release pepsin in its active form, it would eat away the chief cells that made it in the stomach, and so that's detrimental to their function. So protein digesting enzymes, like pepsinogen, are always activated once they're in the lumen of the organ where they're active. Okay, so onward. Our next area of digestion is going to be the small intestine. So I'm going to move over here. So we need lots of room for the small intestine as well, because it has a lot going on. So the small intestine will include the duodenum, the jejunum, and the ileum. All three of these are going to have the same actions that are occurring within the lumen, but the duodenum is arguably the most important of the three.